All right, now that they're out of the way. Morning, folks. So, kind of a big day today. Um, Probably helps if I actually start the stream. So yeah, kind of a big day today because now you're taking everything you've been doing for the past 3.5 weeks and amalgamating it together into a single app. Tiny app, we weren't worried about the front end. Tweeter, weren't really worried about the back end so much. Now we're taking all of that and putting it together and really, bringing in things like database and putting all the pieces together for a full web app. So with that in mind, I'm going to give a few disclaimers before I start this. Disclaimer number one, this is kind of affectionately referred to as the sermon because I get preachy. I'm really passionate about the topic of software project planning and project management in general, to the point that I actually wrote a book on it on Amazon. Let me know if you want to buy a copy. Shameless plug. But what I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through a set of steps that you as a developer would want to do in planning your project out. And this applies to not only your midterm project, but going forward to your final project, to going forward to every side project you're going to do on your own, to going forward to when you are in your own company and having to run your own teams and plan out how your team is going to accomplish building a particular piece of software. I will also give the disclaimer that this is not the only way to do to plan to build a piece of software. But I can also tell you that it works. And this is built off of literally decades of experience of watching entire companies shut down because they failed to plan their software properly. And they got to a point where it was hard, they didn't have a way forward, and they were stuck. And it was going to cost them too much money to dig themselves out. I've also seen too many times where there's a good developer who has a directory on their hard drive that is just full of half-finished projects. And the reason that they're half-finished is because they didn't start planning it properly from the beginning, and they got to a certain point where they didn't have a plan, and they're like, yeah, this is hard, I'm going to come back to it later. And later never happens. Because why do we ever want to go back to something that is hard? That's not typically what we want to sign ourselves up for on a Saturday afternoon. So this whole methodology of approaching it gets around all of that. But like I said, it is not the only way. So even if I say something really dogmatic, please understand this is an opinion. That being said, you got your teams. Hopefully you did the Git collaboration exercise yesterday. If you didn't, that is your very first priority this morning. In fact, even if you did it yesterday, I would recommend starting off with it today. Again, you want to make sure that you are extremely comfortable with Git, and I'll be talking about how Git can help you out a bit later. But you've also probably been doing some decision making in terms of which one of these projects you want to take on. And to put this in perspective, this is modeling what is going to happen when you go get a gig with, say, a design agency or a company that gets contracted to other enterprises to build things. You basically are just going to be told, hey, here's the projects the company's working on. Pick one of these teams that you're going to join. In fact, most of the time you don't get to pick the team, you just get assigned. In this case, you at least get to pick from these 7. And there isn't one that is truly better than the other. There isn't one that's truly harder than the other. There are some that are a little bit more straightforward. For example, if you've never done any kind of game development before and you take on the card game, you're initially going to feel a little bit lost because game logic is a different way of thinking. Similarly, when you start doing things like the smart to-do list or the food pickup ordering, it's going to be very API oriented. So that's going to change things just a bit as well. And I'm realizing that I have iOS people involved in this, so I will adjust my my delivery accordingly. So yeah, you want to start with one of these ideas, and when you're picking these ideas, I don't want you to approach it, even if you've already made a firm decision. I want you to, at least as a team, take the 5 minutes to question that decision, because I don't want you to approach this from the standpoint of, oh, which one of these is the set of code that I want to write? And the reason I say that you don't want to approach it that way is because when you are building a piece of software, it's not about the code you're going to write. In fact, when you're starting off and when you are approaching the idea from the very beginning, you're actually dealing with data. In every single case, when you are delivering a piece of software, what you are doing is delivering access to a specific set of data. And you've got to be passionate about the data, not the technology. Because that data can be delivered with any set of technology. It could be done with JavaScript, with Ruby, with Perl, with Python, with PHP, with Kotlin, with Swift, with C++, with a CSV file, put on a USB drive and snail mailed to somebody. That data can be delivered with any set of technology. So you've got to be passionate about the data first. The data is the product. And the product is the most important thing. I don't know if you guys have heard me say this yet, but one of the quotes that I like to talk about in boot camp, because it's extremely important, is the idea that you will never, ever in your entire career get hired to write code. That is not what developers do. Nobody hires you to code. There's not a dev team, there's not a hiring manager, there is not a senior dev in this world that is interested in having you write code. That's not what you do. What you do as a developer is you build and support products. That's what you get hired for. Products generate revenue. Code does not. Because the product could be a barbershop. The product could be a delivery service. That's not the code. The code is what enables the product to do whatever it's going to do. And in every single case, what the product does is give access to a particular set of data. If you're a barbershop, what you are getting is access to the training of the barber. It's not the scissors, it's not the combs, it's not the Brill cream, it's not any of that. You're getting access to the wisdom that is in the barber's head that allows them to do what they're going to do to your head so that you don't walk out looking like this. So the data in tech is the actual product. And to explain this a little bit further, I want to take you on a thought experiment. I want you to imagine the world is exactly like it is now, and we've got one big, huge, monolithic social media company called Tweetbookagram. This is where we put all of our social media stuff. All of our cat GIFs go up there, the quotes that we misattribute to people, the pokes, the friend requests, the invitations to play Candy Crush, bad memes, it all goes on Tweetbookagram. Every time you have a meal, you take a picture of it, you post it there so everybody knows what your pho looked like for lunch. That's Tweetbookagram. So I want you to imagine this universe where that social media empire exists. Shouldn't be hard. And then I want you to add to this visualization an evil little wizard. And the wizard hates social media. And so what the wizard does is they study and study and study, and they come up with a spell, wave their magic wand, and the app on our phones, the website code, the back-end deployment code, all of the code that runs Tweetbookagram disappears. Gone. The Git repo's gone. And there's nothing, no icon on your phone anymore. The domain doesn't go anywhere. Worldwide panic ensues. It makes more news than when Google shut down 2 weeks ago and had all the Gmail calendar problems. Probably there's a TMZ conspiracy about it. Worldwide productivity is probably going to shoot up 25% because people will actually get work done. It's a big deal. But Tweetbookagram being this big, Silicon Valley empire, employs thousands of engineers, so they're going to sit down, they're going to fire up their code editors, they're going to build a new version of Tweetbookagram, and in about 2 weeks' time, they're back up and running. Maybe their stock price dips a little bit, but Tweetbookagram survives. They're able to get back going, and everything's fine. And in fact, Tweetbookagram is going to be in a better place because now all of the old stuff that they had been supporting from like 7-10 years ago, they don't have to worry about anymore. It's gone. They can just focus on all the cool new things that they want to do with the data they already have. So this pisses off the wizard even more. Wizard studies, makes a new spell, waves their magic wand. The database and all of the backups for Tweetbookagram disappear. You go to log in, there's no account. 2.7 billion user accounts, most of which is like 4 14-year-old girls in New Jersey. But 2.7 billion accounts just evaporate off the face of the earth. All of the pokes, all the pictures that have been uploaded, all of the snarky comments, the vague booking, everything that had happened, every picture of sushi, every sunset picture, every kitten picture, gone. How many people are going to be interested in recreating and rebuilding all of that data? Not too many. Tweetbookagram, done. Company won't last 6 months at that point. Because the value in that empire, the value in QuickBooks Online, the value in Flickr, the value in Slack, the value in Telegram or Gmail or anything like that, is in the access to the data that it provides. So I want you to think about, from this point forward, when you're building software, that's the lens that we have to focus on, is that we are using all the tools in our toolkit in order to provide access to a particular set of data. So the good news is there's some questions you can ask yourself which make sure you are headed the right direction when you're doing this. First question is, what is the data you can access or acquire? And so this is critical because you have to know where your data is going to come from. Are your users going to give it to you? Are they going to manually type it into your app? Are they going to type in their smart to-do list entries, type in their food order? Are they going to click on pictures? Where are you going to get the data from? Maybe it's going to come from an API. Maybe you're going to go out to like the dog API and just bring in pictures of dogs and put them on Wikimap. That's what you're going to do. But you've got to know where that data is going to come from. Then second, can you correlate that data to something else? And here's why this is incredibly important. Individual points of data are not terribly interesting. If I tell you that it's going to be 19 degrees today, congratulations, that is a fact you know now. But it's not as interesting as if I tell you it's 19 degrees today, but it was 28 degrees a week ago. And it's going to be 23 degrees a week from now. Like next Wednesday, it'll be a different temperature. Now we have data over time. We're correlating those data points to time. If I tell you that there's an app that will plot where ice cream trucks are, that's, great. I can tell you the GPS coordinate to within 3 feet of accuracy of where an ice cream truck is. Congratulations, that's a fact you know now. What makes it interesting is if I can tell you that there's an ice cream truck right around the corner from your location and you can go get, a Nutty Buddy or whatever it is that you want to eat. That becomes interesting, is being able to correlate that data to something else. And typically, we tend to correlate it to either time or location or another piece of data that's occurring at the same time. For example, there's a great correlation. There's a graph you can go find online. Scientists actually put this together, that there's a direct correlation with the decrease of market share of Internet Explorer and the murder rate in the United States. Not causation, but correlation. Maybe your app is finding odd correlations of data. There is actually an app for that. But Without that correlation, all you have are individual data points that aren't terribly interesting. So where your app starts to get interesting in presenting the data is being able to correlate your data with something else. And then most importantly, once we have that correlation, the question is, how can we pivot that data to add value? And when I ask that question, I'm actually meaning almost like an Excel pivot table, in that how are we going to present the data in a way that gives value to the user? So if it's the ice cream truck finder, fantastic if we know where that ice cream truck is, but if I just print out GPS coordinates on the screen, that doesn't help the average user. If I put a pin on a map, in fact 2 pins, one for where they are and one for where the ice cream truck is, that's the pivot of that data that adds value, because it allows the user to visualize and go, oh, that one's closest to me, I want a creamsicle, I'm going there. So these 3 questions get you started. And I'm sure you have great ideas about the 7 apps that are available to you, but if you're not asking these 3 questions, all you're doing is coming up with features that may or may not add value. You're just coming up with cool things that you might want to code. And we have to watch out for that. One of the ways we watch out for that is understanding that the difference between features and benefits. There's a huge difference between features and benefits, and it comes down to what the user is willing to do. Users don't pay for features. And when I say pay, I mean money or time. You've probably never, been browsing through the App Store or checking out sites online and gone, oh wow, they used a really cool UI framework, I'm going to download that app. Said no one ever. You don't pick an app because it's got a cool autocomplete or because the button has a green gradient. That isn't why you pick an app. You probably aren't picking apps because this one uses React instead of Angular. Those are features. You're picking apps because, oh wow, this actually adds benefit to me. I am benefiting from using this app. In truth, as a user, you shouldn't care what the features are, really, like how they're built. You should care whether or not this app benefits you. That's what you're there for. So if we want to figure out how we benefit from things, we have to go and borrow from philosophy, like a psychology class in university or a marketing class, arguably same class. But we have to talk about something called the universal values. So this is a bit of a departure from tech, but I promise it's relevant. The universal values is an idea that was come up with quite a long time ago, even older than me. And the idea behind the universal values is that, as simplistic as it might sound, every decision that you make, from the way you tied your shoelaces this morning to where you went to university to what foods you like to eat on Saturday mornings, come down to one of these 4 things. And these 4 things are: we want to look good, we want to feel good, we want to save time, we want to save money. And what these mean is, looking good is we want other people to think that we make good choices. We want other people to look at us and evaluate us as being smart, as being capable, competent, interesting, attractive, funny, athletic, talented, all the good check kind of positive attributes that we want people to evaluate us as having. We will do things and make decisions that make other people think good things about us. Similarly, we also want to feel good, which means when we get up in the morning and we look in the mirror and we have that moment in the mirror where it's like, oh, you again, we want to think all those things about ourselves. And what's funny about humans is humans will do things to look good that don't make us feel good, aka what you did at the bar on Friday night. But we'll also do things to feel good that don't necessarily make us look good. Ironically, we call that integrity. We want to save time, because time is the one resource we have that we don't know how much of it we have. Building crane could topple over, take us all out right now, and we have no control over that. Morbid, I know, but it's true. We don't know how much time we have. We didn't come up with things like escalators and power steering because we really liked working harder. Things that save us time, we use technology to bring those things into our lives. So a lot of the apps that you use, for example, looking up movie times or searching for flights, yes, you could totally physically go to a travel agent, browse pages and pages of flight times that are coming up and pick one, or you can hop on Expedia and have a flight in like 5 minutes. Which would you rather do? You know, online banking is a perfect example of this. So we want to pick things that save us time, and last, we want to save money, and money doesn't just mean cash. Money is all of the resources that we have. That's gas in our car, that's clothes in our closet, that's food in our pantry, and yes, money in our wallet. So if we can find something that saves us or allows us to conserve our resources, you know, which are you going to pick? And 2 apps that do the exact same thing, and this one's free and this one costs $5.99. We're going to pick the free one every single time if they do the exact same thing. Why would I pay for something when I can get the same value for free? Maybe it has an ad on the bottom. Oh no. You know, we're going to pick the free one because we want to conserve those resources. And so all 4 of these values drive our decision making. Who we date, what we eat, how we do our hair, if we have any, that's the universal values. And the reason I bring this up at this point is because if you think about the sites and the apps that you use on a daily basis, what makes you use them and what makes you go back to them time and time again and integrate them is that they address at least one of these. So if you want to take one of those 7 ideas and you want to build a good app based on that idea, then you have to make sure that your app is benefiting the user in at least one of these ways. If it's not, don't build it, or don't build it that way. You want an app that people are going to use, you want an app that's going to get traction and get people signing up for it, build an app that demonstrably accomplishes one of these 4 things. If you can accomplish multiple things, like, hey, you're going to feel good and it's going to save you time and it's going to save you money, you're going to have people signing up for it. Think about Instagram for just a moment. Instagram didn't win the photo sharing wars because it was technologically the best app. Originally, Instagram was built in PHP in 9 days. True story. You can look this up. I'm not even making it up. I'd like to be making that up, but it's true. What made Instagram win wasn't the fact that, hey, you could take a $1,000 camera and put a filter on it that made it look like it was a $100 camera. What made Instagram popular was that people no longer had to upload their picture to Flickr, get the URL from Flickr, go into an email, type that email, send it to their friends, and wait for them to go and look at the picture on Flickr, which then meant that the people had to sign up for Flickr and then get in and then, okay, fine, I finally saw one picture. Well, what if I want to share an entire album with somebody? Oh my God, it was painful to do it, but Flickr was where we started out. Instagram, I can upload a picture, apply a filter, tag it, caption it, tag somebody else in the photo, and everybody else in the world can see it and give me that little dopamine hit of the like on it right away. I felt good. And I looked good because I could make my life look interesting online in no time at all. That's why Instagram won. Not because technologically it was the best product. That's why it was worth $1 billion for Facebook to buy. It's because they did this really, really well. So you want to start creating an app that benefits people. Doesn't matter what the idea is, doesn't matter what the technology is. Where you're going to start, in my opinion, is with something called user stories, because you are not ready to code yet. User stories are how you quantify and basically describe and outline the features that you plan to build. The basic user story has this formula. As a blank, I want to blank because blank. And typically it's something like, as a user, I want to share a picture I've taken because I thought the kitten was cute. That's a basic user story. As an admin, I want to reset a user's password because I want people to have access to their account. It describes something that you would do, a basic feature in an application. And so as a role, I want to take an action because there's a positive benefit. The because is super important because it says why you would want to do this. And it's not, as a developer, I want to build a cool drop-down menu because I want other people to think I'm neat. That's not the way you describe the feature that is going to go into your app. You can also write user stories using the, I'll use the word entitlement. I don't mean it in like the hipster, participation trophy entitlement kind of way. I mean, as a blank, I should be able to blank because blank. So, for example, as a user, I should be able to edit content I have posted because that is my content and I own it. That's the kind of entitlement. And you can also take either one of these, I want to or I should be able to, and you can negate it. I should not be able to edit other people's content because I don't have control of it. As a user, I don't want to have other people viewing certain parts of my profile because that's private. You can use a negative version to describe how some aspect of your app should work. So then we take a user story and we add something called a user scenario. Pardon me. The user scenario allows us to describe how that feature behaves. Given a situation, when I take an action, then something happens. So given that I'm on the login page, when I provide the correct credentials, then I'm logged in and I see my dashboard. Given that I'm on the login page, when I provide invalid credentials, then I get an error message saying I can't type. So the user scenario describes how particular features are going to work. So what we do is we take those and we bundle them together. So this image comes from an article that I will send to you. It's a medium.com article, but it's a guy about 100 years ago, back in 2014, that proposed a framework for doing user stories that combines the traditional user story with the user scenario. And you put a title on it, you add a place for some metadata, some additional information, and now you have a really good description of a feature that's going to exist in a piece of software. And in order to prove his point, because he was doing the article on Medium, he actually wrote the user stories based on medium.com. So, users should be able to save story. As a user, I want to save a story I'm reading because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories. And then the metadata, the additional info, would be like a link to the bookmark icon, like the actual PNG file or something like that, and a link to the design. Maybe it's the wireframe out of Xcode, or maybe it's a wireframe you've done in some other app like mockups or something like that. And so this now becomes a relatively complete description of this feature. And if I take this, just this write-up right here, and I hand it to any person in this room, you now have most of the information you need to start building out this feature. And a good idea of what it's supposed to do, how it's supposed to behave, in fact, where the icon is supposed to go in the layout. Yeah, there's going to be some tech stuff you're going to have to figure out, but now you've got a blueprint. This is a recipe for building out this feature. And the author went one step further, and he added an and statement to the user scenario. So given that I'm reading a story, when I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories and alter the icon to indicate success. Because that's what we expect out of the software that we use. Whether it's a web app, whether it's a mobile app, we have this expectation that the state is going to change to reflect an action we've taken. So if I was a web dev and I was looking at this, I know that there's going to be an image. That image is going to have a link on it. That link is going to point to a route in my back end. That back end is going to have to connect that user and that story in a database table, send back a response. If that response is successful, I'm going to change the URL of the image. Ta-da, I now know how to build this feature. I can plan that out. If I'm in Xcode, there's an image, I'm going to right-click on it, draw a blue line to some code, and I'm done. I minimize, but it's almost that easy. So, we're going to go through and write out a bunch of user stories. And you may wave a red flag at this point and go, wait, Don, I didn't become a developer because I want to type. And that's a fair thing, but this matters. The planning absolutely matters, because if you don't do this typing, you don't know what of the other typing it is that you need to do. You don't know what you're going to code. In fact, there's a great quote that I got last week that is, without a design or a plan, programming is the art of introducing bugs into an empty text file. If you don't write out and plan the features that you're going to build, you don't know what you're supposed to code. But man, like I'm going to do functions, I'm going to do closures, and there's going to be Ajax, and like I'm going to do an async thing, and it's going to be really neat. To where? For what? With what data? I don't know, man, but I'll figure it out. Cool. Write it out first. Spend the time first. Because otherwise you're going to get to Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, you know, the middle of the night between Sunday and Monday, and you're going to have a panic attack because all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh crap, I forgot an entire page, or oh, this whole set of buttons doesn't do what they're supposed to do. Why didn't I plan this out properly? So it's this idea of what we call feature complete. So what you're doing between now and Monday is you're building out what the industry calls an MVP. And that's not Kawhi Leonard MVP, it's minimum viable product. What is the minimum viable product, the minimum set of features that you can deliver, which proves that the data that you're collecting and the way you're presenting it is an app that people would use? That's what an MVP is. And so you're going to write out a bunch of user stories, and you're going to have a bunch of great ideas of how you can prove that your way of doing a map or a card game or a food ordering is going to be the right way to do it. And as you're building these out, you're going to find one, maybe two of these features that are going to stand out more than anything else. These are going to be the ones that when you see them, that's the aha moment. And again, it's not the crappy filters in Instagram. It's that when you hit post and like 90 seconds later, you're getting ding, 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 ding. You know, Bob liked it, your mom liked it, your sister liked it, the cat liked it. You know, some account from the other side of the world that you have no idea who they are liked it just because you put a kitten hashtag on it. That's the aha moment. That's the moment, the feature that you've chosen to build that gives the most benefit and is going to make someone be convinced that they need to use your app. So when you're writing out your user stories, those are the ones you want to put like an extra little star on or something, because that's the contract. That's the one that everything else is in support of. That's your promise that you're going to deliver that feature because that's your rockstar feature. So you've got to find that. But I have to bring up this house. And in order to bring up this house, and if you don't know what it is, I'll tell you what it is in a minute. But in order to talk about this house, I have to talk about the 5 most dangerous words in software development. And these are 5 words that we as humans love, and they will kill you every time. Those 5 words are, wouldn't it be cool if? Because you're going to start writing out all these user stories, and especially when you've got a group of people around a table, all of you are passionate technologists, all of you want to build things, you want to show off, you want to deliver great stuff. You start thinking through the data that you now have access to. And you start thinking about all the things that you could do with it. And especially once you start thinking through some of the features, you're like, oh, well, once we have this, we could do this, and once we have this, we could do this. And inevitably, there is that moment where someone's like, oh man, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this thing? And then you write it out as a feature. And then that turns into, wouldn't it be cool if, and wouldn't it be cool if, and wouldn't it be cool if? And suddenly you have spec'd out Facebook, and it's going to run on a literal cloud server that's going to be a crystal castle floating on a cloud somewhere with unicorns dancing from turret to turret. The problem with wouldn't it be cool if, when you're speccing out features, is that the answer is always yes. Yes, it would be cool if you had time to do that, if you knew everything you needed to know to build that out. With an infinite amount of time and an infinite amount of money, no need to sleep or bathe or carry on a social life, yes, it would be cool if we could build all those features that we've come up with. You've got 5 days. So you've got to be smart about your time. And this house is the best example of wouldn't it be cool if that has ever existed. Anyone know what this house is? A couple of really bad movies about it. It's known as the Winchester House, also known as the Winchester Mystery Mansion or the Winchester Haunted House. And it was owned by Sarah Winchester. Sarah Winchester was the widow of Sam Winchester of Winchester rifle fame, the rifle that won the West in the United States. It had like at one point something like 98% market share in terms of firearms that were sold in North America. So when Sam Winchester died, he left about $27 million in 1890s money to his wife. If you adjust for inflation and everything that Trump has done to the economy, then that turns into somewhere around $650 million today. She was a very, very wealthy woman. Unfortunately, in direct proportion to her wealth was the amount of complete batshit crazy that she was. As was the vogue of the time in the late 19th century, early 20th century, she was very much into psychics and mediums and seances and attempting to understand and connect with the supernatural, and not on a spiritual level, on a social, like, oh, this is my hobby. I'm connected to the supernatural. Just ask me, I'll tell you. And she was actually quite ill mentally, and was prone to delusions and schizophrenia and hearing voices. And so she was convinced that she was haunted. And she moved around a bit before settling in Southern California, where this house is. And before this house was built, she was attempting to address why she was haunted, or believed she was haunted. And so she went to see a medium, not medium.com, a medium meaning someone who could channel spirits. We don't know, we weren't there. Can't judge too much. She went to this medium, and important to the story, but not quite yet, this medium was married to a general contractor. This becomes really important in just a moment. The medium purportedly channeled the spirit of Sarah's dead husband, Sam. And speaking from the other side, the ghost of Sam Winchester told her that she was haunted, that all the ghosts of people that had been killed by his rifles were out for her blood to get revenge for being killed by Winchester guns. And the way to solve this problem was to build a house that would trap the ghosts, and that she should not ever stop building the house to make it just this big as she could make it, and that would, cause the ghost to be trapped in the house, and then she would be safe and find peace. And coincidentally, conveniently, the medium's husband was a general contractor. So the Winchester house was started, and it kept going. Without rhyme, without reason, without plan. And this is the house. You may have seen like YouTube videos where there are stairs that just go up into the ceiling, doors open on blank walls. There's windows that look like they're going to go to the outside. You open it and you're looking into the next room. There's an entire wing of this house that's on the back that you can't get to from the main house. There's no direct entryway. There's not even an outside door for this wing. You have to climb in through a window. Originally, this house was 7 stories tall. There was an earthquake in the 20s in Southern California, and it knocked down the top 3 floors because they were so poorly built. And just because structurally this house could barely hold itself up. In this incarnation, this 4-story house, there's over 100 rooms, 42 of which are bathrooms, only one of which actually works. That was the bathroom for Sarah Winchester, because she believed that the ghosts went through the pipes. And that's not what you want coming up at that particular point. So, the Winchester house, I bring it up as an example of wouldn't it be cool if, because this started off as a functional, nice house. And it just kept getting added onto and added onto and added onto with no real plan, just because people wanted to build things. And there was money to do it. Don't turn your app into a Winchester house. Make sure there's a clear plan for everything that you're going to add on to it, and then you will end up with a beautiful big estate that everything is connected and has, sense to it. Don't build this. So, a few things that you don't have to build. If you're not going to be demoing it on Monday about 11 o'clock, then you don't need to build it. This isn't a startup competition, so you don't need to build the FAQ or the about page or the team page. You don't need to worry about making nice little circular photos of yourself with a bio underneath. This is not something that's going to get you your job with employers. Most employers don't really care about your midterm project because when you're graduating, it doesn't reflect what you are able to do as a developer. So you don't have to worry about that kind of filling it out. And I say this, and I've marked it with a controversy tag, because you don't need sign up or login pages. And you're like, wait, how am I supposed to have users if I can't have sign up or login pages? Well, that's pretty easy. 4 lines of code. Now, HR has told me that I am not allowed to buy squirt guns from the dollar store and spray you if I find you doing this in production. But for the purposes of your midterm, this is completely acceptable. You can log yourself in as any user you want with this. You simply stuff the cookie into your session, stuff the user ID into your session cookie, redirect back to the home page, and ta-da, you're logged in as anybody you want to be. So, yeah, you could set up a couple of different tabs, like in different, Chrome, Incognito Chrome, et cetera. You could have multiple emulators running in Xcode to be able to get, different versions of the app running signed in as different people. Or you can just make it really easy on yourself and build this route. We already know you can build a login. You've done it. So you don't need to do it again. That's not what's important to your midterm project. So spend that couple hours that you might spend doing a login, and I say couple of hours generously, because a lot of people get really deep into the styling of their login page. Please don't bother. One more note on login pages, and I don't want to rant on this too much, but show of hands, who has ever watched someone log into an app or a website and just been blown away by the experience? No one? Anyone? Cool. So if you're going to be standing up here in front of your peers, in front of all the staff, in front of a brand new cohort, and you are now required to type your name without screwing it up, probably not going to happen the way you want it to happen. You see instructors up here that have been doing this for years, and we still typo. It's going to happen. Even if you're doing test@test.com test as the password, you're probably still going to fat finger it in the pressure of trying to do the demo and keep it in the right amount of time. So I want you to think about the forms that you're going to be putting into your app, and think about how much of that you're going to actually demo being filled out in your demo. Because nobody likes to watch other people type, and typing is hard when 50 other people are watching. So be smart about how you're going to do that demo with those forms. If it's something like like the wiki map where you're having to type in stuff for a new point, maybe you want to just have a text file and copy and paste it in. Maybe even build yourself a button that will autofill that stuff for you for the purposes of the demo. That's smart. That's the right use of your time, instead of having to worry about being up here and typing everything correctly. Because as soon as you typo and it's up there on the screen, you're just like, oh gosh. So save yourself that time, save yourself that grief, and especially with something like a sign up or a login, yes, we can assume that you know how to make a new account in a database, and we can assume that you know how to log in, and literally just click a link, okay, now I'm logged as an admin. Click a link, okay, now I'm logged in as a user. That's a lot easier. Save yourself the time and focus on building the things that really matter, which is the features in your app that prove that the MVP works. Cool. So let's go ahead and take a break now, because the tech part of this that we're going to talk through is going to be lengthy, and so I want you to be fresh going into it. Okay, let's dive back in. So everything that I've talked about up until this point has been philosophical, psychological, has been about concept and approach more than anything else. So now we're at a point where we're not ready to code yet, but we are ready to start making a lot of technical decisions based on the other things that we've already talked about. Because without going through that process, we don't know what tech to pick in order to fulfill those promises. We've got to have the user stories that describe the features first before we can figure out what's the right tech to actually service those features. Quick show of hands, how many iOS people are there? 2, 3, okay. So, this is a JavaScript focused deck, but I will speak to iOS things as I go through. I'm not entirely ignorant to them, just partially. But ERD, and this can be broadened out as a bigger heading to say data design. ERD is your entity relationship diagram, which shows how your data is related to each other, and we typically use it to describe SQL tables. But it doesn't matter how you are storing your data. What matters is that you are coming up with an initial schema for what that data is. Now, this does not mean that what you design right now is set in stone and cannot be changed. In fact, it probably should be changed, but this gives you a starting point. So I want you to think about the idea that data models or SQL tables, I want you to think of them as nouns. Nouns, as we know from grammar, person, place, or thing. These are the main actors in our application. And we're used to thinking this way, we just don't typically identify it as this. You know, the user creates a post. Well, that's two different nouns, and that's two different data models that we're going to have. And what's a user going to have? Well, a user is going to have, you know, an ID and an email address and a name and a password and whether or not they're an admin. And what's a post going to have? Well, a post is going to have a title and an author, which is probably going to be that user in some reference. It's going to have a body, it's going to have a date, maybe a Boolean for whether it's published or not, whether it's a draft. We can start to plan these things out based on what we have already written out. And this is why user stories are critical, because they form the basis of all the other tech decisions. As a user, noun, I want to save a story, noun, that I'm reading because I found it useful. Given that I'm reading a story, same noun. When I tap the icon to save a story, still same noun. Then save it to my saved stories. That's a new noun. And in this context, a saved story is the unique combination of a story and a user. So if it was SQL, it would be a join table. And saved stories becomes a full-fledged data model because there's me as the user, there's the story that I saved, there's when I saved it. Maybe I sorted it into a folder or I put a tag on it or something like that. There's extra metadata that fleshes that out and makes it be a full-fledged thing. It's not just this two-column data table that is otherwise meaningless. So this is me getting 3 data models out of one user story. Now imagine if I had like 20 user stories. And I go through and I pull out all of the key nouns that I have represented in my app. I may find out that I've called the same thing 2 different names. Way better to figure that out now than when I have written 2 versions of the same code to service what is essentially the same noun. It also allows me to kind of coalesce and come up with the definitive list of all the different bits of data that I need to collect. And so this takes us all the way back to our first question, which was, what is the data I can access or acquire? Where am I going to get it from? If I don't know that, well, then these become really hard to make real. And so now I can start to plan for what that data is and how I'm going to collect it and whether it's going to be an integer, whether it's going to be a string, whether it's going to be an array, how I'm going to represent that. These are the things that I can start to plan out. And yes, it will probably change over the next 5 days, but I can start to plan it out now and give myself a good starting point. Way better to figure out all the tables and data models that I need now, whether I'm storing them in SQL, whether I'm storing them in objects, whatever it may happen to be, figure out what those are now and not get to Sunday afternoon and go, oh crap, that story thing, I should probably build that. That's not the position I want to put myself in. I want to do the planning first so that I have a clear path for building. So once we have a data design in place, we can start making some really solid tech choices. For example, on the website, are you going to deploy your app? You're not ready to code it yet, but you want to make the decision beforehand of, are you going to deploy it? Unfortunately for iOS, the idea of getting it built in the App Store by Monday, best of luck. Probably not going to happen. And again, this is your midterm. This isn't your billion-dollar startup idea, so I wouldn't go through that effort for that anyway. But from the web side, you want to make the decision of if you're going to deploy it ahead of time, because it is going to change some things about how you build your product. You primarily got 2 options. One is localhost 3000. That's literally just running it, npm start off your local machine, and that's totally okay. No one is going to think poorly of you. No one's going to think you haven't done a good job if you are running it on localhost 3000. In fact, unless there is a reason you need to put it on Heroku, like you're doing the 2-player game, or maybe you're doing Twilio and you need the HTTPS to be able to send text messages or something, unless you need that online component, maybe you don't want to take on the extra bit of deploying it to Heroku. But if you're going to decide to do it, it's something you want to start doing like Friday or Saturday, not Sunday night. It's not something you get together at JJ Bean across the street on Monday morning and go, okay, you know what would be really cool? Let's deploy this. No. That's another case for the spray bottle of no. Like, a cat climbing the drapes or something. And from the iOS side, honestly, just run it in the emulator. That is your best bet. Plain and simple, just run it out of Xcode. That is your best bet. So, server framework is nice and straightforward. And this is for the web people, for the back end. You're not ready to code yet, because if this wasn't your midterm app, this was, say your final project or something else that you're going to build, this is where you would decide what language you're going to code in. We've made it pretty easy for you for the midterms. You're using Node, you're using Express. And so that's your language and your framework taken care of. Boom. In fact, in Compass, if you look at getting the part of the midterm project, which is setting up the repo, there is a link to a Node skeleton where we have already built out the skeleton of an Express app for you, and you don't have to worry about starting from an empty text editor. The one disclaimer I will give to that is that there is a route already set up in there for users, and it's built as an AJAX route. That does not mean that all your routes have to be AJAX routes. It's just built so that you see where the routes go. So don't think that it's a requirement. It is a suggestion at best. But you're going to use Node and Express on the back end. For the iOS folks, your choice of language is pretty straightforward at this point. For the JavaScript people, please don't forget about NPM at this point. Because here's the thing, you've got a lot of features that you want to deliver. You've got a stack of user stories that you and your team have written out, and there are going to be some technical challenges you're going to have to conquer. Some of them may have to do with date and time. Some of them may have to do with currency. Some of them may have to do with certain APIs, like Twilio. Don't think that you have to write all of the code from scratch to solve all of those problems. In fact, just last week, or earlier this week, no, it was the end of last week, NPM hit a really cool milestone. Node as a runtime environment turned 10, and NPM tipped over to 1 million packages. 1 million packages. So there's 1 million modules on NPM that are there to help you. It's not quite as easy as just Legoing together a bunch of NPM modules to be able to get what you want. That's not how JavaScript works, thankfully. But do the research on NPM when you are thinking about some of the tech problems you're going to have to face, and see if there are modules that can help you. When you're looking at modules on NPM, please use the same mentality that you would use if you are shopping on eBay. Here's why I say that. If you're shopping on eBay and you come across, brand new iPhone XL, fresh in the box, never been opened, never been used, $20. You're like, oh my God, this is the best deal ever. I can't believe this. And the seller's got like a 56% rating. Are you going to buy that iPhone? Please say no. Probably not, because it's like, oh, not too reliable, probably a scam. If you're on NPM and there's only been like 5 downloads of the package ever, and the last time it was touched was like 2 years ago, and it only has like 2 or 3 stars on GitHub, probably not the package that's going to solve your problem. Might be, but probably not the package that's going to solve your problem. Whereas you're looking at NPM and you realize that the last time it was updated was like 6 seconds before you loaded the page. It has 1,000 stars on GitHub and like 45,000 downloads every week. That might be the package that's going to solve your problem. So use your online shopping mentality to find the packages that are going to help you. And if you're looking at 2 competing packages that may do the same thing and you want to know which one's the best, ask a mentor. That's what we're here for, is we've probably fought some of these battles before and can help you figure out which one is the right one. That being said, there is a package called Moment that if you haven't already run into it, if you're doing anything with date and time, use Moment. There is also, and of course, as soon as I need to say the name out loud, I can't remember it, but there, if you just Google it or search it on NPM, there's a really popular currency package. So if you're doing anything that represents money, there's a really popular currency package that, oh God, I can't believe I can't remember the name of it now, that is basically like Moment, but for money. It's that simple. So things like that, go and find the really tried and true ones, and they will help you just by saving you so much time and grief. Date and time in general sucks to work with. So, routes. You're still not ready to code. And routes is going to apply equally but in different ways to both web and iOS. On the web side of things, you're going to want to plan the routes that are going to happen on the back end. In that route is the unique combination of HTTP verb and path. And so you're going to want to figure out what all of your routes are. Which ones are going to use which verb? Are these routes going to have URLs in the params? Is there going to need to be a post body? What is going to need to be in that post body? What is those routes, what's the actual format of them going to be? And this is a great time to practice your RESTful conventions, where basically there are 4 patterns that we use all the time in REST. And if you replicate those 4 patterns for all your data models, you're good. And I want you to think about that if tables, your data models are your nouns, routes are the verbs, because routes are where you are actually taking action on your data. So here's how this applies to iOS. You're going to have a number of possible points in your app where you're going to be accessing data, whether you are creating data, editing data, even if it's just viewing data. REST is a concept that applies to all of us because we're basically doing CRUD actions with the data: create, read, update, delete. So what you want to think about is throughout your application, what are the various entry points that a user is going to go through in order to access the data model? How are they going to create the data? How are they going to read the data? Like, actually instead of CRUD, think of it as bread: browse, read, edit, add, delete. So where do they see the index of things? Where do they see an individual item? Where do they edit it? Where do they create a new one? How do they delete it? What are each one of those entry points going to be where you're going to be accessing data? When you're building it through Xcode, you have a very different kind of approach that you're doing, because you're typically starting with the UI, and then you get that lovely blue line to connect it to code. God, I hate you guys. Once you graduated from the web cohort, just go learn Xcode, watch a bunch of tutorial videos, and learn how Xcode works. It's brilliant. It'll make you hate iOS devs forever. But yeah, you still have to think about where those entry points are. Where are, is it, in particular, you also want to be considering the interactions, because for you guys, your interactions are in a lot of ways your routes. Is this a button press? Is this a form submit? Is this a swipe? Is this a scroll? Those are the things that are going to give people access to data. And you want to go through your user stories, and for each and every point where a user is going to be interacting with data, you want to figure out what that interaction is going to be, because if you plan it now, you don't get to the wireframe screen and go, what should we do? You want to plan it now, ahead of time. For the web folks, you're also going to go back to your user stories, and you're going to want to read through and think about this. As a user, I want to save a story I'm reading. Well, that's a get route /story/ID. Because I found it useful, given that I'm reading a story, get /story/ID. When I tap the icon to save a story, then save it to my saved stories. So that's probably a post route to /stories/ID/save. Save being the verb here that we're going to do. And alter the icon to indicate success. So great, that's 2 routes just off this one user story with verb and path. And I know that when I post to /stories/ID/save, I can grab the current user because I'm going to be logged in. So I don't need to send anything through in the post body, but I am sending a post because post in HTTP means I'm creating a new record. So this is a new saved story. That's why post makes the right amount of sense. So you've now got that mapped out. You've planned that out. You've thought through it. And that's on one user story. Again, let's go through 20 user stories and let's write down every one of the routes, every one of the data interactions that we're going to have. Wow, all of a sudden that sounds like a to-do list for back-end development. That sounds like a whole set of callback functions that you're now going to have to write, each one with its own task, each one with its own set of data that it represents. And if you write all those out and you make sure you've got the full set, and maybe down here in the additional info, you've written down the route that is going to service these user stories, and you don't end up with any user stories that don't have routes on them, then you now have a really clear to-do list of all the back-end work that needs to be done, but if it's a get route, you also know that there's front-end work that's going to be associated with that. Congratulations, you are now on your way to a task list. That's a great place to be. Wireframing. So outside of the iOS people, anybody done wireframing before? A couple people. Okay. Your knowledge will be invaluable. Share it with your peers because they're going to be staring at it going, what do I do? Wireframing. Wireframing is a design technique in the sense that it is where you are starting to sketch out your layout. But what you're doing is you're describing the layout, defining the data hierarchy, and demonstrating where the interactions are going to occur. This is not about color. This is not about typography. It's only about hierarchy, proportion, and general layout of your data. There's a couple mistakes that people tend to make when they first start wireframing, and so I want to bring them up to you now so that you don't make them in the future. One of the first ones is the wouldn't it be cool if, because you see white space and nature abhors a vacuum. So we see white space and our urge is to fill it. So we're like, oh great, we'll put a sidebar in and it'll have widgets. Great, what are the widgets going to do? I don't know, stuff, we'll figure that out later. Anytime you say we're going to figure it out later, your team should yell at you and you should stop and figure it out now. Because later is going to be in a panic every single time. As soon as you say, wouldn't it be cool if, your team gets to yell at you, and as soon as you say, we'll figure it out later, your team gets to yell at you. Stop and figure it out now. Maybe it's just taking the image, the text, and the bottom box and stretching them across. There's nothing wrong with that. But I also use this particular wireframe here, minimal as it is, to tell a story, because I like stories. The story is, there was when we used to be over on Hastings in the Launch Academy facility, there was a company that hired one of our grads to build their MVP. And this company, very small company, literally one person, two people really. So they hired the grad to build the MVP. They knew what they were getting into. And the deal was that I would kind of act as the senior for this grad and help him along and make sure that he was on the right track. So about 2 weeks in, and I've been meeting with this person every day. I know what they've been working on. I know they've been kind of working their butt off. A little bit of foosball, but that's okay. The owner sends me an email and is like, hey, really need to talk to you, really concerned, think I've made the wrong decision. Can we set up a meeting? Sure, no problem. So we had a meeting later that day. She comes in and she's just, to put it mildly, pissed. Like, she is flamingly pissed off. I picked the wrong person. I made a big mistake. I've lost all this money. We're not getting any further ahead. They keep having to rebuild everything. They're going too slow. I don't like this process. This isn't what I want. Okay, cool. So I slipped into damage control mode and I started asking some questions. Well, are you doing like a morning stand-up? Are they telling you what they're going to be building? Do you see them working away? Are they spending too much time playing foosball? Kind of figuring out what the deal is, kind of prompting with things like, hey, you have to understand at the beginning of a project there's a lot of infrastructure. You don't always see visual results right away. She's like, no, I get all that. And she keeps repeating this one thing. He keeps having to rebuild everything that I tell him to build. I know what he's working on. He tells me what he's working on. He shows me when he's working on it. But I keep having to get him to rebuild it. It's just not right. So this little flag pops up in the back of my head, because it's not my first rodeo. Admittedly, in software, it's unfair that you're expected to know a lot of things by your second rodeo. That's a very small number of rodeos. But I've been through this before, and so I asked the question, do you have wireframes? Oh, yeah, I've totally got wireframes. Have you given him the wireframes? Yep, I've given him the wireframes to work on. And so I'm like, okay, great, let me see them. Because I hadn't seen the wireframes up to this point. And this partially explains why 2 weeks had gone by without the progress that she wanted. So what her app was an app to help staff film and TV sites for small indie productions. So you'd post a project that you're working on, and if you needed like lighting or sound people or PAs or whatever it was, and kind of a general project page with a big hero image at the top and the title and some description of the project. And then down at the bottom is this box, notifications. And so I'm looking through this wireframe and I'm like, okay, yep, this makes sense. Totally, I understand what's going on here. And literally on her wireframe is a box like this that says notifications. So I had a moment, and I asked her, what goes in here? And I guess she thought, I don't know, that I'd lost the ability to read English. And because she was already kind of emotional, she gives me the notifications. Okay. Are the notifications horizontal or vertical? Do they have a picture? Is the picture on the left or on the right? Does it have a subject line? Where do you show the author? What happens when you click on it? Does it have a read or an unread status? Does it scroll horizontally or does it scroll vertically? What is each notification going to look like? Where do the notifications come from? Where do the badges go for the notifications? How do I know when I've got a new notification? And what happens when I click inside this box? And if any of you are Simpsons fans and you've seen the I Choo Choo Choose You episode, and at the end, Bart's got the VHS remote control and he's like, if you watch really closely, you can see when Ralphie's heart breaks. I actually got to see that happen in real life. And I'm not going to lie, it was kind of cool. Vindicating at the very least. But what the process of going through those questions demonstrated to her, because she was a very smart woman, she really immediately understood that the error she had made in doing these wireframes and the reason that her developer kept having to rebuild everything is she hadn't communicated her vision of what all these pieces were supposed to be. So if I was to take this wireframe and I was to give it to everybody in this room, I would get back 25 different versions of what a notification is. And all of you would be wrong because it doesn't match what's in my head. So one of the big traps that we get into is that we tend to get very hand-wavy and broad about things and then hand it off to somebody else to realize that vision, and we're dissatisfied. The way to get around that is to make sure that with each major element that you're going to put on a page, if it has sub-parts to it, we have clearly described what those parts should look like. And there's a really neat thing that you can find online. It's bordering on meme territory, but there was a study done where they got, it was to prove the Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you don't know what that is, it's a great Google. But they got a group of people together by asking people on the street, hey, do you know a lot about bicycles? And so they got these people together, and they got these people to start off by drawing a picture of a bicycle. And the things that people thought a bicycle was were way far away from what a bicycle actually is. And so you may think you know what a notification should be, or you may think you know what a post should look like on a blog, but until you actually sit down and go, well, this is the list of data I have, and this is the amount of space I have to put it in, how do I get this relationship to work out the right way? You realize that there's a lot of assumptions that you make that are very hand-wavy about how things should look. So this process ends up being great because you get to challenge all your assumptions. So first, don't worry about negative space. White space is actually your friend. Don't invent features just to fill in white space. And second, for the pieces that you are choosing to put on the page, make sure that you are clear about what that piece should look like. Additionally, if any of those pieces are going to have, maybe it's going to trigger a modal, maybe there's a drop-down menu, maybe it's going to expand or contract, or however, maybe you can drag and drop it, make sure there's a version of a wireframe that shows what that interaction looks like. Because I might do 10 options on an autocomplete and you might do only 5, because you think the 5 is going to keep from covering up this content down here. And I'm like, well, I don't care about that content. I'm going to show all the possible options on the autocomplete. And if you don't know what something should look like, go look at examples. Go find other apps that do the exact same thing and copy them. Honestly, there are no copyright police. Nobody's going to kick down the blue doors here with jackboots and go, you made your app look like another one. You're going to jail. Doesn't happen. Never will happen, doesn't exist. This is an example of what not to do. This is every possible control you could ever shove into a web page with breadcrumbs and images and buttons and sign-up forms and social sharing and 5 stars and a scroller and a carousel and a video and text. And don't do this. Don't just cram in things because you know that controls exist. I've seen iOS apps where I swear they just took every UI control and dragged it into the frame and were like, okay, I'm done, it does everything. Don't do that. Be willing to break things up into separate pieces. Don't think that everything has to live just on one page. Pages are free. You can have new views. Be willing to be sparse with that. So once you're done wireframing, there's a process that you're going to go through called storyboarding. And storyboarding is something that we borrow from the film and TV and comics world. It's the art of telling a story in a chronological format. You're deciding what the scenes are, how they progress, and storyboarding is important because this progression from one point to the next is telling a story. Your data tells a story. The data of the ice cream truck being right around the corner, there's a story to that because you have to log into the app. The app has to be able to find your location. It has to be able to put you on a map, and then it has to be able to show the ice cream truck in relation to you. There's a story there. There's a chronological set of steps that have to occur for you to get that benefit. So this applies to when we're building apps as well. And if you've read Dilbert or Garfield, you've seen a storyboard. The standard 3-panel comic like XKCD, something like that, it's a storyboard. It's moments in time, and the story is told by the transition from one thing to the next. Well, it's used in film and TV, stage plays and musicals and operas. Basically what happens is the director takes scenes from the story, and then the director's job is to figure out how to transition from one point to the next. Well, you've got wireframes. You've got wireframes for all the places where your app is going to give the user data to interact with. Great. Figure out what order to put them in. In fact, what I recommend doing is going to the dollar store and buying a pad of Post-it notes. And draw out a quick sketch of each wireframe and go up to the window or go to a whiteboard or stand by the mural. I don't care if you do it on the bathroom mirror. And take those wireframes and get them in the right order for how the user should be interacting with your app. The settings screen is probably not the first thing that the user is going to interact with. It's probably going to be the home page. Figure out what that order is, because that's going to dictate a few things for you. It's going to dictate how you're going to link those views together, whether that is with actual links, like you click on this and it goes to this view, or it may be when I submit this form, this is the next view that's going to come up. It's also going to tell you what order your navigation should be in. Go to any site, go to any app you want to, and look at the order that the navigation is in. Lighthouse Labs is no exception. The order that the navigation is in is the order in which we want you to consume that content. So once you figure out what order your wireframes should be in, you now know where to link things, how to get each view to progress to the next view. Trust me, it is a lot easier to do this now with Post-it notes that you can wad up and throw away if you need to, than to have linked it all together and turn around and go, crap, this has to go somewhere else, and go back and have to relink everything. Because even if you're just dragging blue lines in Xcode, it's still a pain to make sure that each thing is going to the right place. Plan it out the right way first, you're in a great place. So this is a path that you are creating. This path is the timeline, and it's the happy path, the ideal path of consuming this data. And even if you don't use your wireframes, you can get your path from here. Because once you've got these user stories written out, there's going to be a clear order in which the features are going to be consumed. In this case, user can't consume a story until they've been able to click on a link to get to that story. There you go. So let's talk about design, because wireframing, storyboarding, and design is kind of all one big bucket. You're still not ready to code. The design matters, and I will never, ever, ever say that it doesn't. The color theory matters. There's a reason social media sites are blue and financial sites are green and food sites are red or yellow. There's a reason those colors are chosen. Fonts matter. I've seen people agonize and get into literal yelling, screaming arguments over whether they should use Calibri Light or Calibri Regular for something. That was a real argument that happened in a real company that made hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It was the funniest shit ever. Because the devs were just like, dude, it's 4 characters in a file. We'll change it. We don't care. But the designers were literally red-faced yelling at each other about which one was better. So the design matters. And whether you're going to use like rounded corners on your pictures, and whether you're going to have gradients, and whether you're going to use transitions and animations, whether you're going to have drag and drop, and whether you're going to style select drop-down boxes, all that stuff matters 100% of the time. But it's not where you need to get stuck. Because there's a really big however, like literally there's a really big however. We're training you to be devs, not designers. There are resources out there that can help you make these decisions. I'll say it again, this is not your billion-dollar startup. You're not submitting this to the Webby Awards or some app contest to win on the merit of your design. Here, we're far more worried about it being functional. So Dribble, Folio Focus, Smashing Magazine, go look at Behance is another great example. Go find design sites. In fact, worst case scenario, go find a site or an app that is similar to the one that you're building. You want to look at food ordering sites? Go look at Skip the Dishes or Just Eats or Uber Eats or something like that. If you're building a smart to-do list, go look at other to-do list apps. You're building wiki maps, we'll go look at Bing if you have to. You can look at Apple Maps. Don't worry, London, they finally moved it out of the middle of the ocean. Go look at Google Maps. Go look at Yelp and how it integrates maps into things. If you're looking at card games, we'll go look at other card games online or other apps that are doing card games and look at what they've done. Like I said, there are no design police that are going to kick down the door and go, oh, you're using something that's similar to something else. You're a terrible person. 90% of the internet is plagiarized. We stole the other 10%. There are no copyrights on designs. That's why this is every frickin' website ever right now. Like, you go to any startup site, and this is the format they're using. You've got some big hero image that's most likely a GIF that's showing people doing really meaningful things. And then there's big white or big orange text over it with a button to see what they're, see why they're cool. And then there's going to be a bar that goes across the whole thing that's either going to be gray or orange, occasionally blue, that's got some quote in there about why they're disruptive and changing the marketplace. And then always there's 3 columns that talk about the features. And then there's usually another one of these bars that has a testimonial in it that the person never actually said that, but they said they could say that. And then down at the bottom is a footer with social media in it. Every website ever. And it works. And the reason is people have learned to expect this format. People can consume what they want from it, and it just works. So you want to borrow this? Fantastic. There's like 100 themes that are out there that will help you with this. And I'm going to go on record as saying this. If you really get stuck in terms of what your app should look like, go grab a theme. Like if it's for the web, go grab a WordPress theme, strip out the PHP, replace it with EJS, you're done. No one's going to arrest you for that. Just get a free theme. But no one's going to care that you made it look like something else. We're going to care that it works. The reason Bootstrap has become so popular and why so many sites for so long looked the same because they were Bootstrap sites is because it just worked. That's what's important. So, great quote. Doing development without a design is like doing origami blindfolded. Yes, you will get folded paper. It will not be a pretty crane. If you don't have a design in place, how do you know what to build? How do you know what markup to write? You don't. How do you know what code to write to support a button click or a link click or something like that? You don't. So you've got to have the design in place before you can start to code. And if you ever come to me and you're like, oh, well, I'm just doing this to test out my data. That's what the command line's for. There's nothing that your some sample layout is going to do to prove your data. Your data doesn't change just because you render it on a screen. That's what the command line is for. So for the web people, you're going to have to figure out a UI framework. For the iOS people, you're going to have to figure out which control set you're going to use. Grids make building easier. Being able to understand how a grid works on a page in rows and columns allows you to lay things out on the page, have them align properly. This will make your life much, much simpler. For the web people, just go shoulder surf and look at the grid that's in Xcode. You'll learn a lot. Snap to grid is like the best thing ever. Unfortunately, when you have to start picking grid frameworks for the web, things get a little bit trickier. And the reason things get a little bit trickier is because there's a few that you might be able to use, like 1 or 10,000. Last time I checked, if you Google CSS grid framework, there's like 130,000 different hits on Google. So we're going to make this nice and easy. The answer to this question is pick one of these 2. These are the big kids on the block. Their legacy, although both Bootstrap and Foundation are now using Flexbox in their latest version, so they are trying to keep modern with the times. CSS Grid is going to make these go away at some point, but one of the things that Bootstrap and Foundation do is they provide you with all of the UI controls. properly styled buttons, properly styled forms, drop-down menus, nav bars, all of those kinds of things. There's 100,000 UI kits out there for iOS. All of them have a slightly different style for things, or you can just use the native controls. It's up to you if you want to, get into the styling of that, but do the due diligence and find a UI kit, find a framework that matches what you want to accomplish with your app. This also should not be a point where you get stuck. Yes, you may have some implementation things that you're going to have to learn along the way, but it's good experience, because most likely you're going to go out into the world and have to support an application which uses some kind of UI kit or framework that you don't know yet. And so learning to work with one means that you are in a good place to now be able to go support somebody else's product that already has one implemented. In 5 days, you don't have the time to implement your own. So be smart, use something that's pre-built. Plus, it's just great experience to learn how to use these. Okay, I told you I was going to have to talk about Git. You're still not ready to code, and now is a great time to mention Git. So you remember talking about Git on day one and how Git was an important tool for developers? You probably do. So Git for collaboration is a little bit different, and you want to use good Git practices. And I'm going to send this deck out so you will have this 8-step checklist, but you're going to want to clone the repository onto your local machine. You're going to want to start getting into the habit of making branches, because branches are where development code should live. Master is supposed to be the clean working version of your app at all times. In that branch, you're going to code your brains out. And you're going to fix bugs, and you're going to open and close files 10,000 times, and you're going to build out whatever feature you're working on in that branch. Once you are done coding that, you're going to check out master, and then you're going to pull. I want you to get in the habit, when you're working on a team, that every time you type git checkout master, your very next command is git pull origin master. Because that makes sure your master is always up to date before you merge your branch in. Merging your branch in means that you are taking the working code and you are bringing more working code into it. Not putting bad code on top of good code and going, I hope it works. That's not the way Git is supposed to be. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, you probably learned at some point the rule of coffee pots, which is if you have a pot of old coffee half full and a pot of new coffee half full, you do not mix them together, because now what you have is a full pot of old coffee. So that's the way you want to treat your code. Once you have merged, then you're going to push git push origin master. And then you're going to follow the instructions on the shampoo bottle, lather, rinse, repeat, and you're going to go back up to step 2. You're going to make a new branch for the next feature, the next bug you're going to work on. You're going to do your code, check out master, pull, merge, push, back to step 2. Now you'll notice that steps 3, 5, and 6 have asterisks on them, because this is where you are going to test things. Failing to do this is criminal in the tech world. There should be somebody that kicks down the blue doors and arrests you for doing this, or not doing this. Once you are done coding in step 3, you're going to test and make sure that what you have built works. And you want to test it rigorously. Use bad data, use good data, test the working condition, test the error condition. Try and do things that a user would do that might break whatever it is you have built. Don't just type in perfect data one time, hit submit, get the result you expect, and go, it works, I'm perfect, I'm great, I'm a rock star. That's not the way testing works. Testing works by, well, the joke is a quality control engineer goes into a bar, orders 1 beers, orders 2 beers, orders 0 beers, orders -3 beers, orders banana beers. Like, you have to try and test things and break them. So, bless you. I was allergic to testing when I first started too. Step 5, once you pull, so you have pulled in the code from the repository to your working machine, before you merge, test the app, make sure it works. Your feature is not going to be there because you haven't merged it in, but test and make sure that what you've pulled works. because if it doesn't, somebody else broke the build, and that needs to be fixed before you merge your code. Otherwise, we have 2 coffee pots again. Then, after you merge, test again. Make sure that your code that worked before you pulled works with the new code. If it doesn't, go back to your branch. Fix that. Make sure it works before you push. Pushing broken code is something that you should consider to be just forbidden. You should never think that it's okay to push broken code. The only way that works is when you push another branch other than master, because your friend on your team has said, don't worry, I will fix that bug for you. In which case, buy them beer. But each time you go through this cycle, steps 3, 5, and 6, you're going to test after you have done each one of these steps. And please, just please, as a matter of principle, it's not a hard and fast rule, it's just principle, please don't code on master. I'm sure that if I was to go back and look at the Git histories of your projects over the past few weeks, I would see beautiful coding, and it was all on branches, and nobody had coded on master, and all of your commit messages were beautiful explanations of what you had done. None of them were ASDF, JKL, shit. Like, none of that had happened, because I'm sure you've been practicing great Git habits for the past 3.5 weeks. Just in case, let me be the one to tell you that this is not a tool that you get to wait until you start your job to learn how to use. This is an expectation on day one that you are walking into the job being competent and comfortable with Git and what the Git workflow is. Given that you're hitting the, close to the halfway point, now is a great time to start practicing those skills and getting into that habit, because you will drown very, very quickly in a job if you don't have these skills. And I'm speaking from industry experience. Version control is something you've got to have nailed before you leave. Now is a great time to start practicing. Okay, good news, you are almost ready to code. Everything that you have gone through up to this point has described the happy path for you to build your great application. So now you're at the point of what we would call scaffolding. Scaffolding is something that I recommend doing paired up, literally the whole team paired up and doing it. And here's why. Here's your checklist. You're going to set up your repository, make sure that your team's added as collaborators. You're going to download and install all the resources that you need to use. You're going to download the skeleton app. I've never had somebody be allergic to this lecture before. That's awesome. Download and install all the resources, all the UI kits, the frameworks, the libraries, the plugins. Download and install it all. Get it imported into the app properly. Use, if you're using something like Bootstrap or jQuery, use CDN links. Don't worry about having to download all the files and put them in your public folder. Use CDN links. That's what they're there for. And then this point here is the big one that everybody makes a mistake with, so I want to shine a very bright light on it. Make sure that your app loads after installing all the things. Make sure you can do a build in Xcode. Make sure you can run npm start and the page actually comes up. Even if it's a blank page, you have no errors in the terminal, in the debugger, you have no errors in the console. Just that first page comes up and you're like, okay, I have a clean environment in which to start. An environment that contains all the libraries, all the UI bits that I'm going to need to build this wonderful thing that I've planned out with all this work with user stories and data design and routes and everything else. If it doesn't load, if you can't get it to run once and get at least a hello world screen up, then you're not ready to start coding yet. You don't start cooking a beautiful dinner in a dirty pot. That's not the way it works. Once it works, once you have solved any build problems, any installation problems on that first machine, that the whole team has been involved in fixing those problems, then you push that code up to GitHub. Everybody else downloads it to their machine. And everybody else now should know how to solve the problems on their individual machines to make sure that they can get to the point of hitting a build or doing an npm start and having it work. Only at that point are you ready to move forward. You don't get to be the one whose machine it got set up on first and go, see ya suckers, I'm going to get started. It's not the way teamwork works. And now, once everybody's got a clean working environment and you're ready to start, now you get to decide on team responsibilities. You are practically ready to code. Your fingers are hovering over the keys, itching to type. But you've got to divide up tasks. You've got to figure out who's going to work on what. And I would love to be able to stand up here and tell you that I have the silver bullet perfect formula that's going to help you divide up tasks perfectly every time. It doesn't exist. I don't. I can't. Doesn't work. The reason is every team on every project is going to be just a little bit different. So, ways that you can divide up tasks. You can have somebody do all the UI work. You can have somebody do all the back-end callback function data work. You can have somebody that owns all the API stuff, and they just know how to get data out of the APIs. One person could own all the client-side JavaScript. Sure, okay. One person can own all the database stuff. I'm going to do all the migrations, all the data modeling, all the ERD, anything that has to do with querying the data. I'm going to be the one that writes that code. You could also break it up where each person on the team works on a feature. Basically, you grab a user story off the stack and go, I'm gonna build this. And you run with it. So all the front end, all the back end, all the interactions, everything, you own that user story. You could do it all pair programmed. And you're like, but Don, I've only got 5 days. How am I supposed to do it all pair programmed? Guaranteed you will go faster paired up than you will by yourself. You will not lose time if you decide to do it all pair programmed. In fact, you're probably going to run into cases over the next 5 days that you're going to have to do pair programmed. Be open to doing that. This is not the Rhodes Scholarship competition. This is not the Olympic relay race. No one is going to think that you are a bad person if you're like, hey, can I get someone to pair up? Because I'm stuck on this. Or, hey, I want a better way to approach this. Can we all talk about this for 5 minutes? That's not a bad thing. Don't think that, we're not going to notice that you are a beautiful shining snowflake that has made great contributions to your app. That's what get blame is for. Worry about building a great product, not standing out from your peers. That's the key thing. Maybe somebody's going to own all the migrations. Maybe you want to make it responsive so that it works on mobile for the web people. Maybe one person's going to own all the deployment stuff. Ultimately, you're going to figure out whatever works. What I want to tell you with this is that you have a really neat opportunity right now, which is there's a lot of stuff that you've learned up to this point. Probably not all of it you're super comfortable with. Probably most of it you're not super comfortable with. You know what makes you comfortable? Repetition, being able to do it over and over again. So if you're coming into your midterm and there's some aspect of what you have learned over the past 3.5 weeks that you're not super comfortable with, be willing to open up to your team and say, hey, folks, you know what? I feel kind of crappy about network stuff, like client-server stuff. Can I own that piece of it? Maybe it's CSS, maybe it's working with APIs, maybe it's data stuff. Just be like, hey, I need to get better at this. This is something I'm feeling really weak on. Can I own this piece? I may need some help, but can I own this piece so that I can practice it and get better? Just because you may be the best one on your team at a certain thing does not automatically make you responsible for doing it. In fact, if you are the best person on your team at UI or at database stuff or at APIs or whatever it is, you should probably be the last person to work on it. You should be there in support of everyone else so that they can get their skills up. Again, this isn't a startup competition. There's no funding, there's no $10,000 check at the end of this, and no one's going to think that you haven't contributed because you didn't write all the code for a certain thing. It is a team effort. The team is building a product. Be in support of that. If all we did was matched up people and said, oh, well, this person's really good at front end, this person's really good at back end, so they're going to build a great app, well, then we're kind of slotting people into building things that maybe they don't want to work on right now. Maybe the person who's really great at front end is like, yeah, I just did that all last week. I don't want to do it anymore. I want to do some back end stuff. And the back end person may be like, you know what, that was 2 weeks ago. I'm glad I'm done with that. I'd rather be doing front end. Work on what you need to work on and be willing to identify that to your team. And if you are, as a team member, have somebody else coming to you and saying, oh my God, I suck at database stuff. Can I please own this? And you're feeling the same way, then you get to go, you know what? I feel the same way. Great. We're going to pair up on this. And ta-da, both of you get better. Both of you come out of this better technologists than when you went in. That's the goal. Congratulations, you are now ready to code, because now you know what you're going to code. Now you get to take this happy path that you have planned out, that is really clearly laid out. You know what every interaction is going to be. You know where the data is going to go. You know where the app is going to live. You know what the UI is going to look like. You know how the user is going to progress through the app. And your user stories tell you how those interactions are going to happen. Now you're ready to build it out. Now you have a clear plan. So, some tips. Start with static pages first. And for the iOS people, start with your wireframes. Like, absolutely start with the UI first and make sure that you have a clear sense of how they're going to interact with it before you ever start worrying about writing some code behind it to make those interactions happen. For the web side, literally open up VS Code or Sublime and make index.html, make a static page first. If the CSS doesn't work on a static page, it's not going to work once you put it into EJS files. Figure that layout stuff in the browser first, use the dev tools, do the pixel pushing if you have to, but figure it out there instead of worrying about, oh, well, the back end doesn't work, so I can't do the front end. Well, I need the back end to serve up the front end. No, you don't. Save index.html on your desktop and make it work there. It's a great thing. Decide on class and ID nomenclature. Decide on variable nomenclature. Decide on function nomenclature. Decide how you're going to name things. This applies to everyone in this room. Decide on what the naming scheme is going to be ahead of time as a team so that way all the code looks homogenized. Yes, each person has their own accent that they're going to have when they write code. By the time you graduate, like David and Davey are going to be able to look at code and see and tell who wrote it based on the flavor of how that code is written. But you want to decide on some standards for the team and for that project at the beginning. Use placeholders. Don't worry about, oh, well, I've got to make sure I use an image that's actually going to be in the app. No, use a placeholder image. Placehold it. Phil Murray, placekitten.com. Use Ipsum generators. There's great ones out there. Please use a work-appropriate one. Yes, Samuel L. Jackson Ipsum is hilarious, but it also tends to be full of a certain phrase that he is famous for saying that maybe not everybody wants to see on your screen all day long. And please, for the love of whatever you consider holy, do not use porno Ipsum. This is a big thing that a lot of people mess up. And this is cross-platform. Try your layouts with different quantities of data. We have a confirmation bias built into us when we're building something where we only want to see it work. We don't want to see it break. So your layout is planning for an image that's 300 pixels by 200 pixels. Fantastic. What happens if somebody uploads a 4K landscape or portrait, What happens, when you're expecting this big, 25, 30 paragraph blog post and somebody uploads Avengers sucks, end. How does your layout function with that? Deliberately use bad data when you are first building your layout, because now is the time to accommodate for it. You can proactively fix problems like that. In CSS, for example, you may not have worked with them yet, but there are properties like word wrap and truncate that you can use to fix text that is too large for a particular box you're trying to put it in. Play with that stuff. On the iOS side, Figure out things like aspect ratios and how you're going to handle portrait versus landscape. Figure out, are you going to support portrait versus landscape with different quantities of data? If somebody changes the orientation of their device, what does the UI do? How does it respond to that? Because I've seen it so many times where somebody's demoing something and they're like, yeah, this is my app, it looks great. And then they accidentally do this and everything just like dumpster fire. So yeah, be smart about your layout and be willing to break it. Because guaranteed if you don't, your users will. It's just a fact. On the back end side of things, for the actual like logic underpinning everything, always start with your data objects. Always make sure that your ability to query your data is rock solid. And use the command line first. If it doesn't work on the console, it's not going to work in the app. So any queries that you need to do, any methods that you need to do, any data manipulation you need to do, make sure you are comfortable doing it from the command line first before you ever try and do it in your app. You can test out your functions and iterate 25 different versions of them on the command line and then write that one perfect function that goes into your app, rather than having to write the function, run the app, find out it doesn't work, shut down the app, change the function, rebuild the app, retest it again. Like that process, I had hair when I started coding. Like, it just, I make a lot of hair jokes because stress, but the truth is you will burn yourself out doing that. It's just a frustration. Whereas you can run things in the REPL really, really easily and iterate quickly and test it and fix all the little bugs on return values and formatting and all that kind of stuff, so that then you've just got one clean version that you drop into the app and you're like, hey, now I know it works. Be willing to do that. And last but not least, we've been yelling at you for 3.5 weeks to refactor your code atomically, break things down into steps. Single responsibility principle, each function should have one job. The old meme from 6 seconds ago about, hey printer, you had one job. Make sure that the code that you're writing, each thing has a single job that it's doing. And if you're ending up with a 30 or 40 line method, you probably want to break that down into pieces. Last thing I need to talk about is communication. And communication is absolutely critical because this is where projects live or die. It's not in the tech you choose. It's not in the way that you've assigned the tasks. It's in how the team communicates with each other. For example, you have a weekend coming up. You may or may not be in the space on the weekend. That doesn't mean you get to stop coding. There are many tools out there. Slack is an easy choice because you're already in a Slack group. So make a channel for yourself, make a private group for yourself, put everybody in it and actually use it. Communicate about what you're working on. Communicate about when you're going to be available and when certain things you plan on getting them done. What matters, it doesn't matter which one of these you're choosing, Telegram, WhatsApp, Hangout, Skype. Just pick one. Like, seriously, we kind of don't care what you use. What matters is that you are communicating. And then last but not least, please use Trello or Asana or Pivotal Track or Jira or something. Use a project management tool. They're free. Every single one of them that I just listed has a free version. Trello is in fact always free. What matters here is not that you're learning to use Trello, which is important because it's kind of an industry standard. What matters is that you are building up the habit of keeping track of what tasks need to be done in order to finish your project, in order to deliver that MVP, and who's working on them and what the status of them is. Slack is not sufficient for keeping track of all of that all the time. Trello, and any one of the mentors can give you a very quick 10-minute introduction into how Trello works. Davey's really good at it. In fact, Davey's freaking awesome at it. The key thing here is that you get to take that list of routes that you built out or that list of user stories that you made, and you get to turn each one of them into a card that you can drag and drop, that you can assign people to, that you can add attachments to, that you can comment on, that you can color code, and that will help literally at a glance. Anyone can look at the board and go, okay, I know what the status of the project is. I know Bob's working on this, and Sally's working on this, and Tom's working on this. I know where my project is. And this also helps keep you accountable. You as a team get to keep each other accountable. And that's a professional thing. It's not a mommy-daddy thing. This is not about someone keeping tabs on you. It is about someone having expectations that on Monday at 11 o'clock, you're going to be ready to stand up here and put your name on something and say, this is our work. So be willing to hold each other accountable, and there's free tools out there that will help you do it. And it will literally take 10 minutes of your time to learn how to use it. And it makes a difference. And don't start off using it today and stop by Saturday because you're busy. The more you use something like this, the less busy you're going to feel because you're going to have a really clear sense of where things are. This lowers stress, not adds to it. So that's everything I have to say about planning things out and attacking the problem the right way. The last thing I want to say is, I know I've harped on the fact that you've only got 5 days, but to be really, really clear, if you don't start coding by tomorrow at lunch, you're not behind. That means you've spent 24 hours doing really, really effective planning. Get your data design reviewed by a mentor. Have somebody, even if it's somebody from across the room, grab one of these guys that's done wireframing before, have them look at your wireframes, get some feedback. Be willing to just grab somebody from the other cohort passing by and going, hey, what do you think about this? When you've got all the Post-it notes up on the whiteboard or something like that. Getting that feedback and getting second opinions and just being willing to question assumptions means that when you do sit down to put hands on keys, there is a clear, happy path to getting it done. The last thing you want to be in is the situation where it's Sunday night and you realize you haven't built a whole view or a whole page you need. There's a data model missing, a whole feature that you need, one of your aha moments just isn't done. That's not the situation you want to be in because that breeds resentment. That's when fingers start getting pointed. Well, you said you were going to do it. No, you said you were going to do it. Well, I don't like you anymore. Screw you, we're not demoing. Yeah, no, that doesn't work here because that's not how it works in the real world. The real world, clients are out there, the users are out there, and if you say it's launching on Monday, something's got to go live on Monday. On Monday, you're going to have to stand up here and show us what you built. So build something that you're willing to show off. And really good planning will save you a lot of grief in doing that. I will be sending out a copy of this deck. I also have a gist full of links for resources that I will send out. And it's links for doing data design and wireframing and IPSM generators and placeholder images. There's a link to the Medium story about the user stories. I recommend everybody read it. It's just like 8 minutes to read it. And it's really well done. And it helps give you a good sense of why the story and the scenario work well to help you out. Yeah, it's just a list of resources for that. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
How do rooms work here?
You can't have them. Nope. You don't need them. It's nice. It's cozy. You don't need them. Yep. Other questions? You are all, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But when you start using a lot of them, aren't you just creating so much dependencies for your API?
Yes.
Is that considered bad or is that okay?
It depends. Have you heard of the story of LeftPad? Okay, LeftPad is an NPM package that for whatever reason, this guy put out this package called LeftPad that takes a string and it pads the left side of the string with whatever character you want. And it's meant to do things like keep numbers in a 0, 1 or format kind of thing, or to put a certain number of spaces to the left of a string, for display purposes. Well, it turns out a whole bunch of packages were depending on LeftPad. Like over 100,000 packages had LeftPad as a dependency. Well, the guy who owned the package got mad at NPM for something. You can Google it. I won't tell the whole story. And so he unpublished the LeftPad package. And so pretty much every Node app broke. And so somebody else had to quickly push a package called LeftPad. And the maintainers of JavaScript as a whole, ECMA, they said, okay, we kind of need a function that does this anyway. So there's now a function in JavaScript that does left padding. Yes, every dependency you bring in comes with a certain amount of risk that that dependency will have a bug in it, or that maybe it'll get deprecated or something like that. By the way, it's not depreciated. Depreciated is what stocks do or property does. Deprecated is a piece of code that no longer is being supported. So yes, you do run that risk every single time you bring in a dependency. You also run a risk every time you write write a line of code that you're introducing a bug. There is a certain amount of risk reward that we always have when we are bringing in dependencies. But you're starting off out of the box with dependencies on Express, Morgan, cookie parser, body parser, serve favicon, node itself. Like, you're starting off with like 12 or 13 npm packages in your package.json to begin with. I have seen apps that have 140 or more npm packages in them. At the end of the day, the biggest thing you're running the risk of there, outside of the deprecation and the bugs, is just the amount of memory it's going to use when you actually run your app, because all that code has to be loaded into memory, right? That's the bigger issue is performance more than anything else. At this point, for the next 5 days, if you write an app that has so many dependencies that you have performance problems, npm is not your biggest issue. It is a fair consideration and something you always want to think about, but it's always going to be better to use a solution that's out there that has been tested, that people have figured out the hard parts of and the edge cases, than having to write your own. If you can't find a solution that serves your problems, that's when you write your own, but then you're making your own dependency. You're now dependent on your module that you have written for this instead of somebody else's. That was a good question. Any others? Awesome. Well, go build cool things.